welcome to this new video presenting the new features in version 7.10 of Bonita. I am Delphine Qual, Evangelist and Community Manager at Bonitasoft, and in this fourth chapter, I'm going to show you the new feature for accessing a public application for non-connected users, the guest user. This is a bonus feature of Enterprise Edition. Opening the content of a living application to public access is now possible thanks to the new guest user feature. Used in process actor mappings, added to a custom profile to access applications, it allows anyone to access some public content. The Bonita application layout has been updated accordingly to allow a Bonita user with credentials to log in from a public application and access password-protected content, if any. Note, however, that this functionality is different from what was available in version 6 of Bonita as auto login because it allows access to an application and not to a process form. Now let's see in details what this user can do. This user will be able to access content from a public application thanks to the mapping of this user account with a personalized profile of the public type. You can also instantiate a case in a living application thanks to access to a link to the instantiation form from this public application. To do this, make sure that the guest user account is mapped with the actor defined as the initiator of the process and check that the authorization mechanism of the REST APIs allows it to start cases. You will in some cases need the user to be able to interact further on the process. This specific case presents certain risks, which will be discussed shortly. The guest user is given the opportunity to authenticate in order to be able to access content that requires an account and a connection. This is possible from the application menu bar because the Bonita default layout offers a connect link instead of the model connection link for the authenticated user. If you are using SSO, you can still use this guest profile. By default, with Kerberos and SAML, guest user access will bypass SSO authentication. This behavior is, however, not possible with CAS at the moment. Before going into details with the demonstration, we are going to see how this functionality is implemented and also the current points of vigilance and limitations. First, it's important to note that by default, this feature is disabled. You must therefore ensure that the access rights for this guest user account are limited during activation and during configuration. You will have to start by creating a dedicated user account in the Bonita organization, as well as a personalized profile that requires public access. This user will be mapped to the public profile of the application created for the occasion, as well as the actors. We will also map to this public profile the member role, which is the default role containing all authenticated users, in order to ensure that the application is available to all. Once it is done, Bonita must be configured so that it defines which applications will be publicly accessible using the platform setup tool. I will show you all this in detail during the demonstration. But before that, I'm going to tell you about a few things you have to know when using this feature. Unlike authenticated users who have their own user application and interface, as we saw in the previous chapter, the guest user does not have any dedicated interface. For the moment, the configuration cannot be carried out completely from the portal or in the studio. It requires modifications into the platform setup tool. In terms of security, there is a risk of having the guest user do tasks on the process because in this case, we open an unsecured access to the process and the platform. However, there is a workaround to this security problem. You just need to create a second process only for the task concerned, containing only the instantiation form with a guest actor as initiator of this process, and adding, then, a BPM message which will send information to the first process to allow it to continue. So there is no risk of security breach because the platform is not open to this guest user. We'll discover this in more detail with a small demonstration. As you can see here in the organization, in the menu users, I created a user guest with the credentials associated. I have also created, if we go to profiles, a public profile. I called it public in order to recognize it easily. If I click on more here and I go back to the mapping, you can see that I have mapped this public profile with the user guest, but also with two roles. The role member, where other users are mapped, and the role guest member, where guest belongs. Why I've done that is just to make sure that I will give access to all the users, authenticated or not. Once all of this is done, you will need to configure Bonita to indicate which living applications will be available to the public. As I said previously in the presentation, this is done with the platform setup tool in the tenant configuration for the portal part and in the configuration file Authentication Manager config properties, which manages all that turns around authentication. Let me show you. I will go in the platform, configuration, current, tenants, and I will open the Authentication Manager config properties file. Here you can see that we have 4 new properties. By default, since the feature is disabled, the property that you can see here, tenant guest active, is set as false, and therefore we will change it to true in order to activate the new configuration. Next, we will indicate the username and password of the guest account, which I created at the beginning in the portal, and finally, the list of application tokens that will be accessible to the public. Here, for example, you would see that we have a living app with a public token. If I come back to the portal here and I go to applications, we can see that I have an application with the token public as well. If I need to change the token, I can configure it here by editing the application properties URL, and then I will map it with the correct profile, public here. Remember to do setup push and to restart your web server for the new configuration to be taken into account. So now I am going to show you the results. I am going to launch the application here, register. For the time being, as I was logged as Walter Bates and launched it as Walter Bates, I'm still connected. So I will disconnect, sign out. And as you can see, I just sign out from the application, but I still can access it because it's public. So even if I'm not registered, I can have access to this page. And as you can see here, you also have the possibility to sign in. Also, in some cases, guests will have to instantiate a case. In this example, we will have to launch registration process. So I will click on Start Registration Process. I will add my username, my first name, my last name, and my password. And I will submit my request. This is a registration request. So normally, if it is validated, I should be able to connect to Bonita and do other tasks. That's what we are going to see now. If I go back to Bonita in the admin portal, you can see that my application, if I refresh, let me refresh and reconnect. So if I connect to Bonita portal here with the administrator profile, you will see that we have one case instantiated. So now I am going to connect as a user because I have to validate this registration request. As you can see, I have a validation for Delphine Qual. I accept. Now the account should be created in the process. In my application, I have received a notification to tell me that my registration request has been validated and I can sign in. I add my username and my password. And as you can see, I am now connected as Delphine Qual. When you will have to implement this use case, before all, make sure that you have activated dynamic authorization in the file Dynamic Permissions Checks Custom Properties, as explained in the documentation. I will show you, of course. To enable this, if I go back here, you will have to enable dynamic permissions on the REST API process resources to grant the correct access rights. Why do we have to do this? Well, since the default guest profile has no rights to pages, it also has no rights to REST APIs. So when activating dynamic permissions, as they will check the rights in the allocation of actors, this will automatically provide the correct rights. I will show you where you have to do that. You are still in the tenant portal repository. You go to Dynamic Permissions Check Custom Properties. And in this file, in the Process Permission Rules section, you will activate Get BPM Process, Get BPM Process Contract, and Post BPM Process Instantiation. So we've finished with this chapter. I hope you will enjoy this new feature. In the next chapter, Antoine will tell you about BDM multi-package. And if you want to see other videos, follow our YouTube playlist, What's New in Bonita 7.10. Thank you. Talk to you soon.